A $300 Wagyu steak sat untouched on white linen, the meat's char marks catching the light from crystal chandeliers overhead. In Charleston's most prestigious dining room, where old money whispered over wine that cost more than most monthly rents, one detail didn't belong. The waitress in worn sneakers noticed it immediately. Sarah Mitchell was halfway through her second shift, exhaustion carved into every movement, when her extraordinary gift betrayed her silence. The steak's temperature was wrong. The pooling juices told her everything the expensive suit at table 12 was too polite to say. But speaking up, that could cost her everything. What she didn't know was that the quiet man dining alone wasn't just another wealthy customer. In 90 days, he would make her the most powerful person in that kitchen, if she survived what came next. If you've ever been underestimated at work, drop a comment telling me when someone doubted you. Hit subscribe, because Sarah's about to prove every doubter wrong. And stories like this don't show up in your feed by accident. Also, my grandmother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. But I made a bet that this video will go viral because I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories matter by hitting that subscribe button. Subscribe to Letters of the Heart, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. The Golden Spoon occupied a renovated antebellum mansion in Charleston's historic district. All crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths that cost more to clean than Sarah made in tips most nights. The dining room smelled of old money, expensive perfume, aged wine, and the particular confidence that came from never having checked a price tag. Sarah moved between tables like a ghost, graceful despite the ache radiating from her feet up through her calves. Second shift of the day. 6 hours down, 3 to go. Her movements were practiced, efficient, the kind of invisible competence wealthy diners never noticed because they'd never had to. They looked through her, past her, around her. The kitchen was different. There she was hypervisible, but only as a target. Chef Marcus Thornton ran his domain like a tyrant emperor, his voice bouncing off stainless steel surfaces with the crack of authority that came from 2 decades of making people smaller than him. 4 sous chefs orbited him like cruel satellites, echoing his contempt for anyone who didn't carry a culinary institute degree. Pick up for 12. The expeditor's bark cut through the controlled chaos. Sarah grabbed the tray, barely registering the sous chef's deliberately placed elbow that nearly sent her into the pass. She recovered without spilling. She always recovered. Complaining meant becoming an even bigger target, and targets didn't keep their jobs long. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A text from home. "When will you be home, Mama?" "I finished my homework." Sarah's chest tightened. Lily, 8 years old, doing 3rd grade math on the bed they shared in their cramped apartment because the kitchen table doubled as Sarah's bill-paying station, laundry folding surface, and the only place she could sit to cry where her daughter wouldn't see. "Soon, baby. 2 more hours. Love you. Just get through tonight." Tips had been good this week. Maybe she could buy Lily those art supplies she'd been asking about. The good ones, not dollar store. Sarah moved back into the dining room, her internal calculator already running. Rent due in 6 days, electricity bill overdue by 3. Lily needed new shoes because 8-year-olds didn't stop growing just because single mothers worked double shifts. But she'd learned years ago that waitresses who spoke up didn't keep their jobs long. And what happened next would test that silence in ways she never imagined. Scene 2. The grandmother's promise. 300 words. The smell of fresh thyme hit Sarah as she passed the kitchen herbs. And suddenly, she wasn't in the Golden Spoon anymore. She was 12, standing in her grandmother's small diner in Beaufort, blindfolded while Grandma May held a spoonful of something wonderful beneath her nose. "Tell me what you taste, baby girl." "Rosemary," young Sarah had whispered. And something else. Something sweet, but not sugar. "Honey, just a touch. You've got the gift." The gift. Her grandmother had said it like it meant something, like it could be more than just a party trick in a diner that barely made rent. May's southern kitchen had been small, unglamorous, the kind of place where workers stopped for breakfast and families gathered after church. But people drove from 3 towns over for Grandma May's cooking because she understood something most chefs never learned. Food was memory made solid, love made edible. Don't let the world convince you it doesn't count. Grandma May had told her 100 times. This gift, it's real. It's valuable. Don't you ever let fancy people with fancy degrees tell you otherwise. 5 years now since the funeral. 5 years since the diner closed because no one else could cook like May. 5 years of Sarah working front of house in restaurants where chefs served food she could taste was wrong, could feel was missing something, could sense was lazy. But she'd learned to bite her tongue until it bled. She moved through the dining room now, catching herself automatically analyzing the dishes being served. Table 7 salmon, overcooked by 90 seconds, the proteins too tight. Table 18's risotto, stirred too aggressively, the starch structure broken. Table 4's sauce, herbs dried instead of fresh, the flavor flat and lifeless. Her hands tightened on her order pad. Stay quiet, stay invisible. But silence was about to become impossible. Scene 3. James Whitmore arrives, 500 words. Table 12 sat by the window overlooking the courtyard, gas lamps flickering outside like something from a century past. The man who'd taken it was dining alone. Unusual for a Saturday night when most tables held couples celebrating anniversaries or groups of businessmen pretending their expense accounts had no limits. Sarah noticed him immediately, and not just because solo diners tipped better when you paid attention. He didn't belong. Not in the obvious ways. His suit was expensive, probably $5,000 of Italian wool and hand-stitching. His watch was understated, but Sarah had seen enough wealth to recognize platinum when she saw it. But something about him was different from the usual Charleston old money crowd. His wealth felt earned, not inherited. There was a sharpness in his eyes that came from building something rather than maintaining it. James, she'd heard the hostess use his first name only, no reservation, walk in. Observed everything. His gaze tracked the server's movements, noted the timing between courses at other tables, caught the kitchen's rhythm through the serving window. Between courses, he took notes on his phone. Not texting, writing, documenting. Sarah's instincts prickled. Food critic? Corporate spy? Either way, probably bad news. He ordered the signature dish without looking at the menu. "The Wagyu, please. Medium rare." "Excellent choice." Sarah's customer service voice was smooth, practiced. "Any sides?" "As the chef recommends." 20 minutes later, Sarah lifted the plate from the pass and her entire body went still. The steak looked perfect. Beautiful sear, professional plating, the kind of presentation that belonged in magazines. But the texture was wrong. She could see it in the way the meat sat on the plate, the way the juices pooled at the edges. The color gradation from crust to center told her everything. Sous vide, Wrong temperature. Someone had rushed it or miscalibrated, and 3 degrees made all the difference between perfect and merely expensive. She carried the plate to table 12, set it down with a smile she didn't feel, started to turn away. James cut into the steak. His expression barely changed, just the slightest tightening around his eyes, the way someone looks when they bite into something that costs $300 and tastes like $200. The words escaped before Sarah's brain could stop them. "Would you like me to have them remake that, sir? The temperature's off." The dining room noise seemed to dim. James looked up slowly, surprise flickering across his features. Their eyes met, and for one suspended moment, Sarah saw something she hadn't expected. Recognition, not of her, of the observation itself, of being noticed, of someone actually seeing what he'd seen. His lips parted to respond. Before he could speak, a voice that could freeze blood cut through the dining room noise. "Mitchell!" Chef Marcus Thornton materialized beside the table like a storm front. His face the particular shade of red that came from rage, compressed under professional restraint. His whites were pristine, his toque perfectly starched, every inch of him screaming authority that had been questioned. Since when does a waitress tell a guest about food quality? The question carried across the dining room. Conversation stopped. Silver forks paused halfway to mouths. 60 pairs of eyes swiveled toward table 12, toward Sarah standing frozen with her order pad clutched against her chest like a shield. You were just overstepping." Marcus turned to James, his voice dripping condescension wrapped in customer service. "Sir, I apologize for this completely inappropriate interaction. Our staff is trained to serve, not to comment on the culinary expertise of chefs with decades of experience and multiple degrees." Sarah's face burned. She could feel the weight of every stare, hear the whispers starting at nearby tables. Old money loved nothing more than watching someone who'd forgotten their place get reminded. "This steak," Marcus continued, picking up James's knife and fork without asking, cutting into the meat with theatrical precision, "is cooked to absolute perfection. Medium rare, as ordered. The color gradient is textbook. Perhaps you'd like to return to your station, Mitchell, before I write you up for harassment." Through the serving window, Sarah could see the kitchen staff crowding for a view. Someone snickered. Another whispered something that made 3 others laugh. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards, to become the invisible ghost she'd perfected being. "Get back to your station," Marcus repeated, louder now, establishing dominance, making an example. "Before I add insubordination to your file." James said nothing. He cut another piece of steak, placed it in his mouth, chewed with methodical precision. His expression was unreadable, neutral, the face of someone who'd learned to hide reactions in boardrooms. Marcus returned to the kitchen victorious, his authority re-established. The dining room slowly returned to normal, conversations resuming at a slightly higher volume, fueled by the entertainment. Sarah finished her shift, moving through a haze of shame. Every pickup from the kitchen came with smirks, whispered comments, the particular cruelty that came from people who'd found someone lower than them in the hierarchy. As she cleared table 6, the sous chef who'd elbowed her earlier spoke just loud enough to be heard. "People like her don't belong in serious kitchens, should stick to refilling water glasses." His buddies laughed. Sarah's hands shook as she loaded the tray. Just 3 more hours. Just get through 3 more hours. What she didn't know was that the comment would be thrown back in his face in exactly 89 days. Or that the quiet man at table 12 had just made a decision that would change everything. End of shift. Sarah collected receipts from her tables, fingers moving on autopilot, her mind still replaying the humiliation on an endless loop. Table 12 had been cleared an hour ago. She expected nothing from it except the memory of her worst professional moment. The receipt holders sat closed on the cleared table. Sarah opened it and froze. $500 bills, crisp and new, fanned across the leather folder. Tucked underneath, a business card in heavy stock, embossed lettering catching the dim light. James Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Restaurant Group, call me. A phone number in small print at the bottom. Sarah's hands trembled. She glanced around the empty dining room, half expecting someone to appear and tell her this was a mistake, a joke, a test she'd already failed. When no one came, she pulled out her phone in the back hallway, fingers shaking as she typed the name into Google. The results loaded. Whitmore Restaurant Group, $340 million valuation, James Whitmore. Named Southeast's most influential restaurateur. Whitmore Group acquires Charleston's Golden Spoon. That last headline was dated 2 months ago. Sarah read it twice, 3 times. The words wouldn't compute. He owned the Golden Spoon, the restaurant where she'd just been humiliated, the kitchen whose head chef had dressed her down in front of 60 people. He'd come incognito, a surprise evaluation of his newest acquisition. And she'd called out his flagship restaurant's flagship dish. Her shift was over. She walked home through Charleston's historic district, gas lamps illuminating cobblestone streets where tourists strolled and wealthy locals laughed over drinks at sidewalk cafes. The business card burned in her pocket like it was radioactive. The apartment was dark when she arrived. Lily asleep in their shared bed, homework neatly stacked on the kitchen table. Sarah sat in the one chair that didn't wobble, pulled out the card, stared at it under the harsh fluorescent light. Call him and risk everything. The job she needed, the income Lily depended on, the safety of staying invisible, or stay silent, stay safe. Stay exactly where she was, forever. Her grandmother's voice echoed from memory, clear as if May were standing in the cramped kitchen. You've got the gift, baby girl. Don't let the world convince you it doesn't count. Sarah picked up her phone. But what she didn't know was that James had already spent 3 hours that night researching something that would make calling him the easiest decision she'd ever make. Morning arrived, gray and humid, the way Charleston mornings did when summer refused to fully release its grip. Sarah walked Lily to school, kissed her goodbye at the gate, and stood on the sidewalk with her phone in her hand for 5 full minutes before dialing. He answered on the second ring. Sarah Mitchell. Not a question. A statement. I hoped you'd call. His directness knocked her off balance. Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to apologize. For what? Being right? Silence stretched between them. That steak was sous vide at 129 degrees instead of 132. 3 degrees makes all the difference. The protein seized differently. The moisture retention changes. The texture becomes noticeably tougher. And no one else in that room noticed except you. Sarah's mouth went dry. How do you know the exact temperature? I called the kitchen after I left. Checked their temperature logs. You were exactly right. He paused. How did you know? The pooling juices, the way the meat sat on the plate. The color gradient was off by... She stopped herself. I sound insane. You sound observant. Papers rustled on his end of the line. The Golden Spoon is hemorrhaging money. Customer complaints up 40% over the last quarter. Zagat rating dropped 2 points. Food bloggers are noticing inconsistencies. I need someone who can identify what's wrong with the operation. You have an entire kitchen staff with Culinary Institute degrees, James Beard nominations, impressive resumes. His voice hardened. And they're serving $300 steaks at the wrong temperature while mocking the one person who noticed. Credentials don't mean much if fundamentals are wrong. Sarah's legs felt unsteady. She sat on a bus stop bench, phone pressed to her ear. What are you asking? Consult for me. Secret arrangement. Come to my downtown office during your daughter's school hours. Taste dishes. Identify problems. Tell me what's actually happening in that kitchen. Paid separately through my company. Nobody at the Golden Spoon needs to know. I'm a waitress with a GED. Your kitchen staff, he interrupted, will continue doing exactly what they've been doing, unless someone who actually understands food helps me fix this. Another pause. What risk are you taking if nothing changes? The question hit like a physical thing. Sarah thought about double shifts that would never end. About Lily asking why they couldn't afford the art supplies. About Chef Marcus's contempt. About dying slowly in a uniform that made her invisible. When do we start? Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My office is downtown, 3rd and King. Bring your palate and your honesty. Leave the uniform at home. Sarah ended the call and sat on that bench for 10 minutes, heart hammering, stomach churning with equal parts terror and something she'd almost forgotten the taste of. Hope. What neither of them knew was that Chef Marcus had already heard rumors about the mysterious man at table 12. And he was about to make Sarah's life a living hell. James's office occupied the 10th floor of a glass tower on King Street, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Charleston Harbor. Sarah arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, still adjusting to the fact that she was walking into buildings like this through the front door instead of the service entrance. The receptionist knew her name, had a visitor badge ready. That small detail made Sarah's throat tight. James's office was sparse, functional. No ego wall of awards, just clean lines, a massive desk, and a conference table where 5 covered dishes waited. Blind taste test, James said without preamble. These are all from the Golden Spoon's current menu. Tell me what's wrong. Sarah lifted the first cover. Beurre blanc sauce, still warm. She took a small taste, let it sit on her tongue. Oversalted? Someone's compensating for under-seasoning earlier in the process. Another taste. And the reduction wasn't taken far enough. The acid balance is off. James typed notes on his tablet. Next. Seared duck breast. She cut into it, examined the color. Cooked unevenly. The pan wasn't hot enough, so instead of a fast sear, it cooked through too much on one side. She tasted. And these are dried herbs, not fresh. You can taste the difference. It's flat. One-dimensional. Why does that matter? It's like putting cheap gas in a Ferrari. Sarah met his eyes. Technically it runs, but why would you? You're charging premium prices for shortcuts. James leaned back, studying her. You don't think in individual flavors. You think in systems, cause and effect. I think in kitchens. Sarah touched the 3rd dish. Because I've watched enough of them to know when someone's cutting corners or doesn't understand fundamentals. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my mother was a cafeteria cook. Elementary school, nothing fancy. But she taught me everything about food, real food, not the kind you need a culinary degree to appreciate. I built this empire hiring the right credentials, people with James Beard nominations and Culinary Institute pedigrees. And I've watched quality decline year after year because credentials don't always mean competence. Something in his voice made Sarah look up. "You remind me of her," James said. "Pure talent the industry systematically dismisses because it doesn't come with the right paperwork." They established terms. $500 per consultation. Signed NDA, complete confidentiality. Sarah would come during Lily's school hours. No one at the Golden Spoon could know. "Why can't you just fix it yourself?" Sarah asked. "Because I'm too far removed now. I sit in boardrooms, review spreadsheets, make acquisitions. I need someone still in the trenches, someone who sees what's actually happening when the kitchen thinks no one important is watching." Sarah signed the NDA with hands that only shook a little. Walking back to her car, she felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Not quite hope. Hope was dangerous. But maybe possibility. Maybe the sense that Grandma May's gift wasn't as worthless as she'd been taught to believe. But keeping secrets in a kitchen is like trying to hold water in a sieve. And the first crack was about to appear. The atmosphere at the Golden Spoon shifted like weather before a storm. Chef Marcus started targeting Sarah specifically. Heaviest trays always went to her section. Worst tables, the ones who complained about everything, tipped poorly, treated servers like servants. His criticism became constant, finding fault in the way she carried plates, the angle of her approach to tables, the speed of her turns. The sous chefs picked up the pattern like hunting dogs scenting prey. They bumped into her in the narrow passages between stations. Accidentally, of course. Always accidentally. Orders appeared on the pass and disappeared before she could grab them, forcing her to ask twice, 3 times, while Marcus glared. Whispered comments followed her. Waitress thinks she knows better than trained chefs. Someone needs to remember her place. One night, Sarah caught it. Undercooked chicken going out to table 7. The meat still had that translucent quality, the texture wrong. She quietly pulled aside the server who was about to take it. "Tell them to check the temp. That's not done." The server mentioned it to Marcus. His explosion rattled the kitchen. Mitchell questioned my cook temp. He appeared in the doorway between kitchen and dining room, voice carrying. "You serve. We cook. Know your place?" Sarah bit her tongue until she tasted copper. Thought of the consulting money accumulating in her account. Thought of Lily. The other waitstaff started distancing themselves. In restaurants, survival meant not making yourself a target by association. Sarah ate lunch alone, took her breaks alone, became even more invisible than before. Lily noticed. 8-year-olds noticed everything. "Mama, why do you let them be mean to you?" Sarah was folding laundry on their shared bed, moving on autopilot. "Sometimes we have to be quiet to survive, baby." Grandma never stayed quiet. Lily looked up from her coloring book, preternaturally wise. She said silence just makes mean people meaner. Sarah's hands stilled on a pillowcase. She said that. All the time. She said quiet people aren't peaceful, they're just scared. And when you stop being scared, mean people don't know what to do. Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathed in the shampoo smell of her hair, and said nothing. Those words would echo in her mind 3 weeks later, when Chef Marcus made his biggest mistake. 4 weeks into consulting, Sarah identified the systematic problem that had been destroying the Golden Spoon's reputation one dish at a time. "You're using pre-made stock," she told James, laying out her notes in his office. "Not in every dish, but in enough. Someone's cutting costs, and it's obliterating the flavor foundation of every sauce that touches it." James frowned. "How can you tell?" "Homemade stock has depth, layers of flavor that develop over hours of reduction. Pre-made stock tastes flat, one note. There's no complexity. It's like the difference between fresh squeezed orange juice and the stuff from concentrate. Technically the same thing, but any real cook can taste the difference." "Show me." Sarah pulled up the Golden Spoon's food cost reports. James had given her access to everything. "Here. Stock expenditure dropped by 60% 8 months ago. That's when the Zagat rating started declining." James studied the numbers and then picked up his phone. "Test it. Atlanta location. Switch to homemade stock for 2 weeks. Track everything." 2 weeks later, the data came back irrefutable. Customer satisfaction up 18%. Repeat visits up 23%. Comment cards specifically mentioned richer flavors and more authentic. James implemented the change across 3 more restaurants. The quarterly revenue increase, $1.2 million. He called Sarah to his office on a Wednesday morning, and his expression was different. Not just impressed, vindicated. "You just proved this works," he said. "But I need you at the Golden Spoon specifically. That's the flagship, and it's still declining." Sarah's stomach dropped. "If you bring me in officially, Marcus will sabotage anything I touch. The whole kitchen will. Then we do it without him knowing." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sarah would write detailed quality reports, identifying problems and recommending solutions. James would implement them as corporate directives, mandates from ownership that kitchen staff couldn't refuse without insubordination. The first change rolled out 2 days later. Mandatory temperature checks and cooking time logs. Marcus was furious, ranting about corporate micromanagement, but he couldn't refuse. Not directly. Quality improved immediately. Customer complaints dropped 31% in 3 weeks. Sarah watched from the dining room, secret satisfaction warming her chest. Every properly cooked protein, every correctly balanced sauce, every dish that left the kitchen the way it should have been all along. She'd made that happen. Without credentials, without permission, with nothing but the gift Grandma May had given her and the courage to finally use it. Lily noticed the change at home. "You seem different, Mama." Sarah was smiling while washing dishes. Actually smiling. "Maybe I'm remembering who I used to be." The victories accumulated like proof. Menu items refined, plating standards raised, waste reduction protocols that saved money while improving quality. Sarah moved through the Golden Spoon's dining room, knowing that every improvement, every small triumph, carried her fingerprints, even if no one could see them. 6 weeks after the first corporate directive, the Golden Spoon's Zagat rating ticked up 0.5 point. Food bloggers noticed. Something's changed at the Golden Spoon, and it's extraordinary. Whatever corporate's doing, it's working. The kitchen finally feels alive again. Charleston Food Weekly ran a feature, "The Golden Spoon's Renaissance: How New Management Saved a Sinking Ship." Marcus was interviewed, taking credit. We've refined our processes, gotten back to fundamentals. It's what happens when you have trained professionals who care about excellence. Sarah read the article during her break, standing in the back hallway, and almost laughed. The man taking credit for her work had no idea she was the ghost haunting his kitchen, fixing everything he'd broken. James sent her a text. "Seen the article?" "Sarah." He spelled fundamentals wrong in his quote. "James, you're changing an entire operation, and no one knows it's you. How does that feel?" Sarah stared at her phone for a long time before answering. "Like I'm finally doing what I was always supposed to do." But success in the shadows has a way of drawing light. And the light was about to become a spotlight neither Sarah nor James wanted. Marcus noticed patterns the way predators noticed wounded prey. The corporate directives were too specific, too targeted. They didn't address broad operational issues. They fixed exact problems with exact dishes he was personally responsible for. The temperature protocols, the stock quality, the herb sourcing. Someone wasn't just critiquing the kitchen. Someone was analyzing his work specifically. He started investigating. Pressured line cooks about who'd been asking questions. Checked server logs against the timeline of corporate mandates. Cross-referenced complaint data with staff schedules. And found an impossible correlation. Sarah Mitchell's days off perfectly aligned with mysterious consultant meetings listed in corporate communications. Her section rotations matched up with specific dishes that later appeared in corporate improvement directives. Marcus followed her on a Tuesday afternoon, watched her leave the Golden Spoon at 2 p.m., still in street clothes from dropping off her daughter. Followed her downtown to the Whitmore Group headquarters on King Street. Photographed her entering the building. Waited 2 hours. Photographed her leaving with a folder under her arm. He called his sous chefs together that night after service. "The waitress has been undermining us to corporate." They dug deeper. Found the NDA paperwork Sarah had accidentally left in her break room locker, buried under her extra apron, but still there. The Whitmore Restaurant Group letterhead, the confidentiality clause, the consulting fee structure. Marcus's face went from red to purple. Not just betrayal, worse. Validation that she'd been right. That his kitchen, his authority, his entire professional identity had been found wanting by a woman with a GED and dirty sneakers. He called an emergency staff meeting the next day. Early afternoon, between lunch and dinner service. Sarah was working her shift, wiping down tables in the dining room, unaware of the gathering storm in the kitchen. Marcus stood at the head of the prep station, his entire team assembled. "We have a trader who's been secretly criticizing this kitchen to ownership." He didn't name her yet, but his eyes kept darting toward the dining room, toward Sarah's section, and everyone followed his gaze. The whispers started immediately. Sarah felt the shift the moment she walked into the kitchen for her next pickup. The stares, the sudden silence when she appeared, the way conversations died and restarted after she left. End of shift, Marcus cornered her by the time clock. "I know what you've been doing." His voice was quiet, controlled, more frightening than his usual rage. "Meeting with Whitmore, consulting, undermining trained professionals to make yourself look important." Sarah's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're—" "I have photographs. I have your NDA paperwork. I have proof." He leaned closer. "And tomorrow, everyone else will know too." Sarah drove home with hands shaking so badly she had to pull over twice. Sat in her car outside the apartment building and tried to breathe while her entire world spun apart. And tomorrow, everyone else would know too. Because Marcus was about to make sure Sarah's betrayal became the story everyone in Charleston's restaurant scene was talking about. Marcus posted to 3 professional culinary forums before midnight. The posts were carefully worded, avoiding direct accusations, but making the situation crystal clear. When a server with no formal training secretly consults for ownership, undermining trained professionals with decades of experience, it's a symptom of what's wrong with the industry. Everyone thinks watching cooking shows makes them a chef. Charleston's food community erupted like a grease fire. Other chefs piled on. This is exactly the problem. People without credentials thinking they know better than those who've put in the work. Stay in your lane. Get actual training before you criticize people with culinary degrees. Food bloggers picked up the story by dawn. Controversy at the Golden Spoon, server versus kitchen staff in secret consulting scandal. By morning, Sarah's name was everywhere. Her phone exploded with notifications. Text messages from acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in years. Facebook friend requests from strangers. Comments on articles she couldn't bring herself to read past the first few lines. Who does she think she is? Waitresses need to stay in their place. Another person with no training trying to tear down people who actually worked for their success. Some were supportive. Other service industry workers, people who understood being dismissed by credentialed professionals. But they were drowned out by the tide of contempt. Lily came home from school crying. Kids were talking about it. Their parents read the food blogs. Her daughter's voice broke. They said you're pretending to be something you're not. Sarah held Lily on their shared bed, her daughter's tears soaking into her shirt, and felt everything crumbling. The consulting money didn't matter. The vindication didn't matter. She'd made her child a target because she dared to speak up. James called at 8 p.m., his voice tight with fury. "I'm handling this." "How?" Sarah's voice came out hollow. "Everyone thinks I'm a fraud. They're right. I don't have training. I don't have credentials. I have nothing but opinions about food, and that's not enough." "It's not opinions. It's expertise. And they don't know what you've actually accomplished." "Then tell them." "I can't, not yet. The timing isn't." Sarah hung up, turned off her phone, pulled Lily closer, and stared at the ceiling while her grandmother's voice whispered accusations in her memory. "You let them convince you it doesn't count." And that was about to change in the most spectacular way possible. James scheduled the investor dinner for Friday night, 48 hours after the social media explosion. 4 investors representing a potential $50 million expansion deal. 2 food critics. Charleston's business elite. He told Marcus to serve his best. Everything perfect. The Golden Spoon's finest dishes. The ones that had won awards 3 years ago before quality started slipping. Secretly, he told Sarah, "Observe everything. Take notes. Be ready." Marcus saw opportunity in the dinner like a drowning man seeing a life raft. The corporate consultant had ruined his kitchen with her interference. Now he'd prove it. He'd served food that looked perfect but wasn't. Deliberate flaws that mimicked the kind of mistakes an untrained waitress making suggestions might cause. Oversalted proteins, broken emulsions, incorrect temperatures. Subtle enough that most diners wouldn't notice, but obvious enough that food critics would. His logic was elegant. proved that Sarah's involvement had destroyed the kitchen's instincts, made them second-guess fundamentals, created the very problems corporate claimed she was fixing. Then they'd see. Then they'd understand. Then they'd fire her and beg him to restore order. The dinner began at 7 p.m. Sarah served the table personally, her hands steady despite her shredded nerves. James sat at the head, calm and unreadable. First course, seared scallops. They arrived golden and beautiful. Sarah knew immediately they were overcooked. The protein seized too tight. The texture would be rubber. Second course, beef Wellington. The pastry looked perfect until you noticed the slight sag, the way moisture had seeped through. Someone hadn't cooled the pâté properly before wrapping. Third course, risotto. Wrong texture entirely. Stirred too aggressively. The starch structure broken. The investors exchanged glances. The food critics took notes, their expressions carefully neutral. Marcus watched from the kitchen pass, satisfied smirk visible. James remained terrifyingly calm, ate every course methodically, thanked the servers, complimented the wine pairings. When the last plate was cleared, he stood, shook hands with the investors, and smiled like a man who hadn't just watched his flagship restaurant sabotage its own future. Because what Marcus didn't know was that James had been recording kitchen audio for the past 3 weeks. And he just captured Marcus explicitly ordering his team to sabotage the most important dinner of the year. The dinner ended at 10 p.m. Investors left without comment, their faces revealing nothing. Food critics departed in silence, already typing on their phones. Kitchen staff celebrated quietly in the back, certain they'd proven their point. Marcus gathered his sous chefs after cleanup. Corporate will see their consultant ruined us. By Monday, this whole nightmare ends. At 8 a.m. Saturday morning, James sent an email to all Golden Spoon staff. Emergency meeting, 10 a.m., attendance mandatory. Sarah arrived at 9:50, stomach churning with dread. She'd barely slept. Lily had asked if they'd have to move, if Sarah would lose her job, if everything was Sarah's fault. Sarah had no answers. The private dining room had been transformed. Chairs arranged theater style, facing a projection screen. James's laptop sat connected at the head table. The investors were there. Sarah's heart dropped seeing them. The food critics, management, every kitchen staff member, still in their whites from morning prep. Sarah took a seat in the back, trying to disappear one last time. James stood at the head of the room, and the resemblance to a trial was inescapable. Power imbalance made visible through setup and space. We need to discuss what happened at last night's dinner. Marcus spoke first, voice confident. The changes implemented by corporate created inconsistencies in our workflow. When you force experienced chefs to follow protocols that disrupt their instincts, let me show you what actually created inconsistencies. James clicked his laptop. The projection screen filled with spreadsheet data. Revenue by location, 8-week comparison. His Atlanta location, revenue up 23%. His Savannah location, up 19%. His Charlotte location, up 21%. The Golden Spoon before consulting began, declining 3% monthly. The Golden Spoon after consulting began, up 31% in 6 weeks. The investors leaned forward, suddenly very interested. This, just a waitress. James's voice was cold, precise. Identified systematic quality failures that credentialed chefs missed for months. Click, new slide. Specific examples with dollar amounts attached. Stock quality improvement. $340,000 quarterly revenue increase. Temperature protocol implementation, 31% reduction in customer complaints. Herb sourcing changes, 18% increase in positive reviews mentioning authentic flavors. Waste reduction, $89,000 annual savings. Each recommendation, each result, each dollar amount. Marcus tried to interrupt. She has no formal training, and yet she's generated $4.7 million in additional revenue across my portfolio in 8 weeks. James's eyes were ice. Can you say the same? The room went silent. James clicked again. Audio file loaded. The kitchen sounds were unmistakable. Clanging pots, shouted orders, the chaos of Friday dinner prep. Then Marcus's voice, crystal clear. Overcook the scallops slightly. They won't know the difference. Make sure the Wellington pastry gets soggy. Undercool the pâté before wrapping. Stir the risotto hard, break it up. Make it look like we're following protocols, but getting worse results. A sous chef's voice. You sure about this, chef? Marcus. Corporate wants to blame quality issues on us ignoring their consultant? Fine. Let's show them what happens when kitchens listen to waitresses instead of trained professionals. Blame the corporate standards. The recording ended. No one moved. No one breathed. The investors' expressions shifted from confusion to fury. The food critic's fingers flew across phone screens. The kitchen staff sat frozen, several looking anywhere except at Marcus. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. James had known, had been recording, had let Marcus hang himself with his own arrogance. But James wasn't finished, because the nuclear option was still in his pocket. Sarah Mitchell. James's voice cut through the stunned silence. Stand up. Sarah's legs barely supported her. She stood, tears already forming, certain this was the moment he'd distance himself, protect his reputation, sacrifice her to save face with the investors. Tell them what you observed last night. Her voice shook. The scallops were seared at too high heat. The protein seized. You can tell by texture and the way they resist cutting. The Wellington's pastry was soggy because the pâté wasn't properly cooled before wrapping, so moisture leached during baking. The risotto was stirred too aggressively, which broke the starch structure that gives it proper texture. James turned to Marcus. Correct? Marcus couldn't speak. The audio had already proven intentional sabotage. Denying the technical details now would only make it worse. Sarah Mitchell has consulted on 47 menu items across my restaurants. 43 have increased sales. 4 needed adjustment. That's a 91% success rate. James looked at the investors. I'm not asking your permission. I'm informing you of a decision I made this morning. Effective immediately. Sarah Mitchell is head of culinary innovation for Whitmore Restaurant Group. The shock was collective, electric, even Sarah's. Annual salary, $185,000. Full benefits, profit sharing tied to performance metrics she's already exceeding. James's voice never wavered. She reports directly to me, and the Golden Spoon's head chef position is now open for applications. Marcus stood, face purple, veins visible at his temples. You're firing me for her? I'm firing you for sabotaging a $50 million expansion deal. James's voice could have frozen nitrogen. She's just better at your job. Marcus stormed toward the door. 2 sous chefs followed, loyal to the end, or maybe just afraid to stay. The remaining kitchen staff sat stunned. Then the oldest line cook, the one who'd always said please and thank you to servers. started clapping. Slowly, deliberately. Others joined. Not everyone, but enough. The sound built, awkward at first, then genuine. The investors stood, shook Sarah's hand. Looking forward to seeing what you do, Ms. Mitchell. The food critics were already posting. Sarah could see their screens. Breaking. Waitress becomes culinary executive in most dramatic restaurant shake-up Charleston seen in decades. If this moment gave you chills, smash that like button. Drop a comment telling me about a time you wished someone had defended you like this. Subscribe so you don't miss our next story, because vindication this sweet doesn't happen every day. Sarah couldn't speak. Could only nod while tears streamed down her face and her entire world rearranged itself into something impossible. James approached quietly. You earned this. Every dollar, every title. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. But earning the title and keeping it were about to become two very different challenges. The first week as head of culinary innovation, imposter syndrome hit Sarah like a freight train. Her office occupied the 9th floor of Whitmore headquarters, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charleston harbor. Her name was on the door, actual brass lettering that caught the morning light. Sarah Mitchell, head of culinary innovation. She touched it every morning like checking if it was real. Lily visited after school on Wednesday, eyes wide as she took in the desk, the computer, the view. Mama, you have a real office. Sarah sat in the expensive chair that still felt too big. I don't know what I'm doing, baby. Lily set down her backpack, preternaturally wise at 8 years old. Grandma would say you know exactly what you're doing. You just forgot you knew. The first major challenge arrived immediately, redesigning the Golden Spoons menu completely. Sarah needed a head chef who would collaborate, not dominate. Someone formally trained, but humble enough to work with someone who'd learned by taste rather than textbook. Rebecca Torres came recommended by James. Culinary Institute graduate, 10 years experience, and the first thing she said in the interview was, I heard what you did with the stock quality. That was brilliant. They worked together like two halves of a complete system. Rebecca handled technique, the precise temperatures, the molecular science, the plating that made food into art. Sarah handled flavor architecture, the way components built on each other, the balance that made a dish transcendent rather than merely good. The kitchen staff was initially skeptical. Sarah could feel their doubt like humidity. But the first new dish, a low country boil reimagined with Sarah's flavor profile and Rebecca's technical execution, silenced every question. Food critics returned for the soft reopening 3 weeks later. The Charleston Post and Courier ran the headline, The Golden Spoon Has Been Reborn. The review itself made Sarah cry. Mitchell brings uncommon wisdom to common ingredients, elevating Southern classics without losing their soul. Lines formed outside within 3 weeks. Reservations booked 6 weeks out. The Zagat rating climbed another full point. But success brought new pressure. James's board wanted to replicate the transformation across all 15 locations. Revenue projections, expansion timelines, systematic rollouts. Sarah sat in a board meeting surrounded by MBAs and financial analysts and felt the weight crushing her. I can't be everywhere at once. James leaned back in his chair. So don't be. Train others. Build a system. I don't know how to build systems. I know how to taste food. You know how to identify talent everyone else misses. You know how to fix what's broken. That's a system. He smiled slightly. You just haven't named it yet. Sarah left the meeting with her mind racing, fragments of an impossible idea starting to take shape. And that's when the wealthy, regular patron from opening night made Sarah an offer that would change the trajectory of everything. Elizabeth Hartley requested a private meeting through Sarah's new assistant, a sentence that still felt surreal. Sarah Mitchell had an assistant. They met at a quiet cafe in the historic district. Elizabeth was in her 60s, elegantly dressed, the kind of woman who'd been observing Charleston's culinary scene for 3 decades. I sat at table 7 the night you corrected the Wagyu, Elizabeth said without preamble. I've watched every step of your journey since. Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. I'm a food critic for the Post and Courier, but I also freelance for national publications. I want to feature you. From Waitress to Restaurant Empire's secret weapon. It's the story the industry needs right now. I don't have the credentials for that kind of spotlight. Elizabeth's smile was sharp. You have something better. Results. And the industry needs to see that talent doesn't always come wrapped in culinary school degrees and James Beard nominations. The article published 2 weeks later. It went viral in food industry circles within hours. Job offers flooded in. Other restaurant groups, hotel chains, consultant firms, 6-figure salaries, equity stakes, opportunities to build something from scratch. Sarah turned them all down. James asked her about it over coffee in his office. You could make more money, have more autonomy. Why stay? Because you took a chance on me when I was invisible. Sarah met his eyes. I'm not leaving. The loyalty was noticed. By the board, by investors, by industry leaders who understood that kind of integrity was rare. But more importantly, other people reached out. Not employers, seekers, restaurant workers who'd read the article and saw themselves in Sarah's story. A server in Atlanta with an extraordinary palate. A line cook in Savannah who could identify inconsistencies by smell. A dishwasher in Charlotte who understood flavor chemistry instinctively, but had never been allowed near actual cooking. Sarah read their emails late at night, dozens of them, and realized something that made her hands shake. I'm not the only one, she told James the next morning. There are dozens like me, hundreds maybe, talented people buried in positions where no one's looking for talent. James leaned forward. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we could find them, train them, give them what someone gave me. A fellowship program. A revolution, Sarah corrected. And that realization was about to birth something bigger than either she or James had imagined. 6 months later, the Culinary Innovation Fellowship launched officially. Sarah found talent in unlikely places. Servers with perfect palates working in chain restaurants. Home cooks who taught themselves technique from YouTube videos. Self-taught food enthusiasts who'd been told for years they weren't real chefs. The first fellow was Jordan, 26, single father, working as a busboy at the Charlotte location. He'd sent Sarah an email describing how he could taste the difference between stocks made with different water sources. She thought he was exaggerating until she tested him. He wasn't. Sarah worked with Jordan personally, saw herself reflected in every doubt that crossed his face. You deserve to be here, she told him, remembering James saying the same words to her in this same office. Jordan's first menu contribution was a fusion dish that honored his Korean heritage and Southern upbringing. It became a signature across 3 locations within a month. The media caught on fast. Whitmore Restaurant Group revolutionizing how culinary talent is discovered. Industry publications ran features. The Mitchell Method, finding genius in unexpected places. The fellowship expanded. 12 fellows in the first year, from every background imaginable. Former military cooks, immigrant home chefs, self-taught bakers working retail jobs. People who had been invisible their entire careers. Success rate, 83% retention. Fellows assigned restaurants showed an average 15% revenue increase within their first 6 months. Then, something unexpected happened. The NIH Food Science Department reached out. We'd like to study your talent identification methods. Academic validation followed. What Sarah did instinctively, pattern recognition, flavor memory, systemic thinking, had neurological basis. It was measurable, teachable, replicable. Universities started citing her work in food science courses. Lily, now 9, sat in the audience at a culinary conference where Sarah spoke to 300 industry professionals. Afterward, walking to the car, Lily said, "I want to do what you do, Mama." Sarah stopped on the sidewalk, pulled her daughter close. "You can do anything you want, baby. And now you'll believe it." The 1-year anniversary of the investor dinner revelation, Sarah hosted a celebration. All the fellows attended. The reformed Golden Spoon kitchen staff, the ones who'd stayed, who'd learned to see people instead of credentials. Rebecca, Elizabeth, James. Sarah raised her glass. To seeing people, not resumes. To talent, wherever it lives. To the courage it takes to believe in someone when the world says you shouldn't. The toast echoed through the room. James found her afterward, standing by the windows, looking out at Charleston's skyline. "You've changed the industry. You know that, right?" "I've changed 12 lives. The industry is..." 5 major restaurant groups have launched similar programs modeled on yours. Culinary schools are adding courses on unconventional talent identification. You started a revolution, Sarah. She thought about Grandma May, about the gift that almost died in silence. But there was one more place Sarah needed to go. One final wound that needed healing. Sarah asked James for a weekend off, the first since her promotion. She drove south toward Beaufort, South Carolina, where Grandma May's diner once stood. Lily, in the passenger seat, watching Spanish moss drift past the windows. James had offered to come. Sarah had declined. "This is something I need to do myself." They pulled up to the building just after noon. It was a coffee shop now, renovated with modern fixtures and trendy Edison bulbs. But the bones were the same. The brick facade, the wide front windows, the door that still stuck slightly when you opened it. Sarah sat in the car, hands on the steering wheel, breathing carefully. "You okay, Mama? Your great-grandma built something here, something that mattered. Then it disappeared when she died, and I always felt like I let her down by not saving it." Lily, wise beyond her years, said simply, "But you built something new." The word settled into Sarah's chest like truth. Inside, the coffee shop owner recognized her immediately from the articles. "You're Sarah Mitchell. This place, your grandmother ran May's Southern Kitchen here?" They talked. The owner shared that old customers still came in, asking about Grandma May's biscuits, her fried chicken, her peach cobbler that people had driven from 3 towns over to taste. "Legacy doesn't die," the owner said. "It just changes shape." She showed Sarah the original kitchen in back, mostly unchanged. Small, cramped, nothing like the golden spoon's gleaming professional space. But standing there, Sarah felt something shift. This was where the gift was born. She placed her hand on the old prep counter, closed her eyes, and let the memories flood in. Grandma May's hands guiding hers, the smell of herbs and butter and patience. The lesson about tasting with intention, not just hunger. You've got the gift, baby girl. Sarah stood in that kitchen, and her grandmother's presence was so tangible, she could almost hear the floorboards creak under May's familiar footsteps. Tears came, finally, fully. Not grief this time. Gratitude. Thank you, Sarah whispered to the empty kitchen, for seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. For teaching me that the gift mattered even when the world said it didn't. Lily hugged her from behind, and they stood there together, 3 generations connected by something that couldn't be taught in culinary schools or measured in credentials. And then something happened that Sarah would never be able to fully explain. That night, in a hotel room near the water, Lily slept peacefully in the next bed, while Sarah drifted into dreams. She was back in Grandma May's kitchen, not the coffee shop version, the real one, alive and humming with the energy of service. Pots bubbling on the stove, the smell of cornbread baking. Grandma May stood at the stove, turned, and smiled. Took you long enough, baby girl. I didn't save the diner. Sarah's voice broke. I let you down. You saved yourself. That's what I always wanted. May crossed the kitchen, took Sarah's face in her hands the way she used to. You took the gift I gave you and multiplied it. You're teaching others. You're changing the system that tried to bury you. I was so scared. Being scared means you cared enough to protect something precious. But you found your voice, baby girl. That's what matters. May's eyes held all the warmth Sarah remembered. Don't you ever diminish what you've built. Don't you dare call it luck. You earned every single inch of this. Every late night, every moment of doubt, every time you chose courage over silence, you earned it. Sarah tried to respond, but May was fading, the kitchen dissolving into morning light. Sarah woke with tears on her pillow, but her chest felt lighter than it had in years. The weight she'd carried, the guilt, the sense of failure, the fear that she'd wasted her grandmother's gift, lifted like mist in sunshine. She looked over at Lily, sleeping peacefully, and thought, she'll never doubt her worth the way I doubted mine. And when Sarah returned to Charleston Monday morning, she was about to discover just how far her revolution had spread. 3 years after the investor dinner that changed everything, Sarah stood backstage at the James Beard Foundation Awards ceremony in Chicago. She'd been nominated for Rising Star Chef and Culinary Innovator of the Year, categories that traditionally went to people with culinary school pedigrees and Michelin-starred restaurants. Lily, now 11, sat in the audience next to James, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself and a smile that made Sarah's heart ache with pride. Rebecca Torres, now executive chef at the flagship Golden Spoon, was also nominated in her category. Jordan, Sarah's first fellowship graduate, was opening his own restaurant next month with backing from investors who had heard about the Mitchell method. When the award in Sarah's category was announced, she didn't win. But it didn't matter. The winner was Marcus Chen, one of her fellowship graduates, a former delivery driver who'd emailed Sarah 2 years ago describing how he could identify ingredient quality by scent alone. In his acceptance speech, Marcus's voice carried across the ballroom. "I want to thank Sarah Mitchell, who saw a delivery driver and found a chef, who taught me that credentials open doors, but talent keeps them open." The room erupted in a standing ovation. Cameras swiveled to find Sarah in the audience. She stood, tears streaming, overwhelmed by the proof that this was bigger than her, bigger than any individual story. After the ceremony, industry legends approached her. Restaurant groups from New York, Los Angeles, Paris. "Tell me about your fellowship program. We want to implement something similar." The revolution was spreading beyond Whitmore Restaurant Group. 5 major restaurant groups now had talent discovery programs modeled on Sarah's. Culinary schools were adding courses on unconventional talent identification. The system was changing, slowly but undeniably. James found her in the crowd, handed her champagne, smiled that rare smile that meant genuine pride. "You've trained 63 fellows now. 47 are still working in the industry. That's generational change, Sarah. It's what Grandma May would have wanted. Not just for me, for everyone. If this story moved you, take a second to share it. Someone in your life needs to hear that their credentials don't define their worth. Subscribe, because we're just getting started with stories that celebrate underdogs who refuse to stay down. The system was changing because one person had found the courage to speak up. Final scene. Sarah took Lily to the Golden Spoon on her 12th birthday. The same dining room where everything had changed 4 years ago. They sat at a table by the window. Lily ordered confidently, and when her food arrived, she tasted it with the same analytical attention Sarah had taught her. The protein's perfect, but the sauce could use another minute of reduction. Sarah smiled. The gift, passing to another generation. But then Lily looked at her mother, serious. "But I don't want to be a chef, Mama. I want to be a doctor." Sarah's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. "Then be the best doctor you can be. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Never let anyone convince you that you can't do something just because you don't fit their picture of who should." "Like the chefs tried with you?" "Exactly like that." They toasted with sparkling cider. The dining room hummed with life around them. Through the kitchen window, Rebecca directed her team with confidence and respect. Sarah's voice carried over the scene. "I used to think credentials gave you permission to have a voice. Now I know different. Your voice doesn't need permission. It needs courage. And courage, that's something no school can teach you." The camera focused on Sarah's office wall, where 2 business cards hung framed side by side. The first, James Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Restaurant Group. Call me. The second, underneath, Sarah Mitchell, Chief Culinary Officer, Whitmore Restaurant Group. The screen faded to black with final words. The revolution starts when one person decides to speak up. Here's what I want to know, and be honest in the comments. Have you ever kept quiet about something you knew was wrong because you didn't think anyone would listen? Sarah stayed silent for years before finding her voice. What's your story? Share it below, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you loved this story of someone breaking through the barriers that held them back, you need to subscribe right now. We're building a community of people who believe talent exists everywhere, not just in the places society tells us to look. Next week, We're bringing you the story of a janitor who revolutionized hospital cleaning protocols and saved countless lives. But first, he had to convince doctors to listen. You won't want to miss it. Hit that notification bell, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and remember, your worth isn't written on a resume. It's proven in what you can do when someone finally gives you the chance. Now get out there and prove them wrong.